The soft glow of my phone screen read 2:47 a.m. when Derek's hushed voice drifted through our bedroom wall. I lay perfectly still in our king-sized bed, my breathing steady and deliberate, every muscle trained to appear relaxed while my mind raced. Through the thin barrier separating our master bedroom from his home office, his words cut through the darkness like shards of glass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Listen, Ryan, she has no idea about any of it. Natalie thinks I'm some struggling marketing coordinator barely scraping by. If she knew what I was really pulling in from these side deals, she'd take half of everything in a divorce. His laugh was cold, unfamiliar. The prenup we signed protects my official salary, but she doesn't know about the offshore accounts. $300,000 this year alone, and she's sitting there worried about our mortgage payments like some pathetic housewife. My heart hammered against my ribs, but years of maintaining composure during high-stakes business negotiations kept me motionless. Derek continued, his voice gaining confidence in what he believed was complete privacy, and the best part, she actually feels guilty about not contributing more financially. Keeps apologizing for her little freelance consulting bringing in only $40,000 a year. God, if she only knew I was making that in a single month from the Brennan Industries kickbacks alone. The irony was so profound it almost made me laugh. Almost. That phone call 6 months ago had been the catalyst, but the foundation of my deception stretched back much further. As Derek continued his conversation with Ryan Walsh, his college buddy and apparently his partner in financial fraud, I remained frozen in our bed, absorbing every damning word while my mind cataloged the implications. What Derek didn't know, what nobody in our social circle knew, was that his supposedly struggling wife had built one of the most successful digital consulting firms in the Pacific Northwest. Brooks Digital Solutions operated under layers of legal structures that I'd carefully constructed over the past 4 years. To the outside world, and especially to Derek, I was simply Natalie Brooks, freelance consultant who worked with small businesses on their social media presence. In reality, I was the founder and CEO of a company that managed digital transformations for Fortune 500 companies, with clients spanning from Seattle to San Francisco. My personal net worth exceeded $2 million, carefully hidden through a maze of business entities, investment accounts, and real estate holdings that Derek had never suspected existed. The deception hadn't started maliciously. When I first met Derek at a networking event in downtown Portland 3 years ago, I'd recently emerged from a devastating relationship with someone who'd tried to steal my business ideas and claim credit for my work. Trust had become a luxury I couldn't afford, so when Derek showed interest in the quiet woman who introduced herself as a freelance consultant, I decided to maintain that simple facade. It was meant to be temporary, a protective measure until I could gauge his true character. Derek Martinez had seemed different initially. Charming without being pushy, successful but not boastful, supportive of my career ambitions even when he thought they were modest. He worked at Pacific Northwest Marketing Solutions as what I believed was a mid-level coordinator, earning around $60,000 annually according to our early conversations about finances. His apartment in Riverside Heights was nice but not extravagant, his car was reliable but not flashy, and his lifestyle seemed to match someone living within reasonable means. Our courtship had been refreshingly normal. Derek paid for most of our dates, but never in a way that felt patronizing. He encouraged my work, listened when I talked about client challenges, and even offered marketing insights that seemed genuinely helpful. When he proposed after 18 months of dating, it felt natural, built on what I believed was mutual respect and honest communication. The wedding had been perfect by most standards. 150 guests at the Bridgewater Country Club, an elegant ceremony overlooking the Willamette River, and a reception that Derek insisted on paying for despite my quiet offers to contribute more substantially. I'd been touched by his pride in providing for our special day, interpreting it as traditional romanticism rather than the control mechanism I now recognized it to be. Our first year of marriage had reinforced my decision to maintain my business privacy. Derek seemed content in his role as primary breadwinner, often mentioning how proud he was to support my entrepreneurial dreams. He'd bring home stories from his workplace, complaining about demanding clients and unreasonable deadlines with the weary resignation of someone trapped in corporate middle management. I sympathized, offered encouragement, and continued building my empire in the shadows. The house on Maple Ridge Drive had been Derek's suggestion, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that he'd insisted we could afford on his salary alone. I'd agreed, knowing I could easily cover any financial shortfalls without revealing my true resources. What I hadn't realized was that Derek's confidence about affording the house came from income streams he'd never disclosed. While I was protecting my assets from a potentially untrustworthy spouse, he was doing the same thing, but with money obtained through methods that were becoming increasingly clear as that midnight phone conversation continued. The Brennan deal closes next month, Derek was saying to Ryan, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed he'd outsmarted everyone around him. My contact there is guaranteeing the contract goes to Morrison Tech instead of the qualified bidder. Morrison kicks back 30% to our shell company, and Brennan gets inferior service for twice the price. It's beautiful in its simplicity. I recognize the name Brennan Industries. They were a mid-sized manufacturing company that had actually approached Brooks Digital Solutions 6 months ago about a comprehensive digital overhaul. I declined the project because their timeline conflicted with a larger client commitment, but I remembered their representative mentioning they were also seeking marketing and branding services. Apparently, Derek had not only secured that contract but was actively sabotaging their interests for personal profit. The revelation that my husband was engaged in corporate fraud was staggering enough, but the phone call revealed layers of deception that went far beyond financial crimes. Derek's voice carried a casual cruelty as he discussed other aspects of our marriage that he clearly viewed as strategic victories rather than loving partnerships. Natalie's so grateful for everything I provide, he continued, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. She keeps apologizing for not being able to contribute more to household expenses. Last month she offered to take on extra freelance work to help with the mortgage, and I had to pretend to consider it seriously. Meanwhile, I'm sitting on enough cash to pay off the house tomorrow if I wanted to. Ryan's laughter filtered through the wall, followed by his equally disturbing response. You've got her completely trained, man. Jennifer keeps pushing for a joint checking account, but I learned from watching you. Keep them dependent, keep them grateful, and they never ask uncomfortable questions. The conversation revealed a worldview that treated marriage as a game of dominance and manipulation rather than partnership. Derek described our relationship dynamics with the detached analysis of someone discussing a business strategy, noting how my supposed financial insecurity made me more accommodating in other areas of our marriage. He bragged about how my guilt over not contributing more money translated to my taking on a larger share of household responsibilities, cooking elaborate dinners to compensate for my perceived inadequacy, and rarely questioning his decisions about major purchases or investments. What made the deception even more galling was how Derek had weaponized my empathy against me. During our marriage, I'd watched him struggle with what I believed were legitimate work pressures. He'd come home exhausted, complaining about demanding clients and unreasonable deadlines. I'd offered sympathy, back rubs, and home-cooked meals, believing I was supporting a hard-working husband through challenging times. In reality, those late nights at the office were apparently spent orchestrating fraudulent schemes with Ryan and other conspirators, while his stress came from managing multiple criminal enterprises, rather than legitimate work pressures. The phone conversation also revealed the extent to which Derek had been monitoring and controlling aspects of our life that I'd never recognized as manipulation. He mentioned tracking my work schedule through what he claimed was loving concern, noting when I had meetings with new clients and subtly discouraging me from taking on projects that might require travel or extended time commitments. I'd interpreted his interest as supportive involvement in my career, but now I understood it as surveillance designed to ensure my work remained small-scale and non-threatening to his narrative. She mentioned wanting to expand her little business last month. Derek told Ryan, his tone dismissive. Started talking about hiring an assistant and maybe renting office space. I had to shut that down carefully, made it seem like I was worried about the financial risk. Can't have her getting too ambitious and starting to ask questions about why we can afford certain things. That conversation had happened during breakfast on a Tuesday morning in September. I'd been excited about the potential growth of what Derek believed was my modest freelance operation, and had tentatively suggested taking some steps toward expansion. Derek's response had seemed thoughtfully cautious at the time, focused on ensuring we didn't overextend ourselves financially. Now I realized he'd been actively sabotaging my professional growth to maintain his illusion of control. The manipulation extended beyond career interference into social dynamics that Derek had carefully orchestrated. He mentioned how he'd gradually distanced me from friends who might have encouraged more independence or financial awareness. Claire Duncan, my closest friend from college and a successful investment advisor, had been subtly discouraged from visiting our home after she'd made some casual comments about the importance of women maintaining their own retirement accounts. Derek had framed his objections as concern about Claire's divorce, making her cynical about marriage, but I now recognized it as a strategic isolation of someone who might have encouraged me to ask uncomfortable questions about our financial arrangements. The phone call revealed that Derek's deception involved multiple collaborators, who were equally invested in maintaining their false personas. Ryan Walsh, whom I'd known as Derek's college friend working in insurance sales, was apparently a key partner in several fraudulent schemes. Their conversation referenced other men in their social circle who were engaged in similar deceptions, creating a network of mutually supporting lies that protected each member's individual scams. Marcus Thompson is getting nervous about the Henderson account, Derek mentioned, referring to another husband in our social group. His wife is starting to ask questions about why he's traveling so much for what she thinks is a regional sales position. We might need to cool off some of the consulting kickbacks until things settle down. Marcus was married to Lauren Foster, a woman I'd grown friendly with over the past year. Lauren worked as a nurse and, like me, often expressed concern about household finances and her ability to contribute equally to their marriage. The idea that Marcus was deceiving her in the same way Derek was deceiving me.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Created a sickening sense of solidarity with someone who had no idea we were both victims of the same systematic manipulation. As the phone conversation continued, Derek's voice revealed a level of contempt for me that was breathtaking in its cruelty. He described my personality traits, my habits, my insecurities, and my strengths as tools to be leveraged rather than qualities to be loved. My tendency toward overthinking, which he'd always claimed to find endearing, was actually something he exploited by providing just enough information to keep me anxious about finances without giving me enough knowledge to understand our true situation. My natural inclination to take responsibility for problems was something he actively encouraged, ensuring that I blamed myself for any relationship difficulties, rather than examining his behavior. The key is making them feel responsible for the relationship's success, Derek explained to Ryan with the tone of someone sharing professional expertise. Natalie works twice as hard to be the perfect wife because she thinks she's not pulling her weight financially. She cooks, cleans, manages the household schedule, and never complains about anything because she feels guilty about not contributing more money. It's honestly the perfect setup. The casual way he discussed manipulating my emotions and exploiting my insecurities revealed a level of calculated cruelty that transformed 6 years of marriage into a retrospective nightmare. Every tender moment, every shared laugh, every intimate conversation had apparently been viewed through the lens of strategic advantage rather than genuine affection. Derek had been playing a long game of emotional manipulation, and I'd been an unwitting participant in my own psychological abuse. But as I lay in that bed, listening to my husband destroy everything I'd believed about our relationship, a cold clarity began replacing the initial shock and pain. Derek's arrogance was about to become his downfall, because his supposedly naive and financially dependent wife had resources, connections, and capabilities that he couldn't imagine. The same careful planning and strategic thinking that had built Brooks Digital Solutions was now turning toward a different kind of project. The phone conversation was still ongoing, with Derek and Ryan planning their next fraudulent venture, while discussing their wives as obstacles to be managed rather than partners to be respected. They had no idea that everything they were saying was being absorbed by someone with the means, motivation, and moral clarity to ensure their crimes faced appropriate consequences. As Derek finally ended his call and quietly returned to bed, sliding under the covers next to my motionless form, I was already mentally organizing the evidence I'd need to gather, and the allies I'd need to contact. My breathing remained steady and deep, the picture of innocent sleep, while my mind raced through a checklist of lawyers, private investigators, and forensic accountants who could help me build an airtight case. Derek settled into bed with a satisfied sigh, probably congratulating himself on another successful planning session that his oblivious wife had slept through completely. He had no way of knowing that his greatest victim was about to become his most dangerous adversary, and that the web of lies he'd so carefully constructed was about to be systematically dismantled by someone who understood better than anyone how to build something substantial from nothing. The irony was perfect in its symmetry. While Derek had been deceiving me about his illegal income and manipulating me through financial control, I'd been quietly building legitimate wealth that dwarfed his criminal proceeds. His contempt for my intelligence and capabilities would make his eventual downfall even more devastating, because he'd never see it coming until it was far too late to mount any meaningful defense. Tomorrow would begin the careful process of documenting everything, but tonight I allowed myself a moment of cold satisfaction. Derek Martinez had just given me everything I needed to destroy him, and he'd done it while believing his victim was fast asleep beside him, completely unaware of the conversation that had just ended our marriage and sealed his fate. The morning after Derek's midnight confession arrived with deceptive normalcy. Sunlight filtered through our bedroom curtains as my husband prepared for another day of what I now knew was orchestrated fraud, whistling softly while he selected his tie with the same care he'd always shown. I watched him through half-closed eyes, marveling at how seamlessly he transitioned from ruthless conspirator back to devoted husband, bringing me coffee in bed with the same gentle smile that had once made my heart flutter. "Sleep well, beautiful?" Derek asked, settling on the edge of our bed with his own steaming mug. His voice carried no trace of the cold calculation I'd heard just hours earlier. "You were out like a light when I came to bed. Must have been all that work you did yesterday on the Patterson account." The Patterson account, a small bakery chain that had hired me for what Derek believed was basic social media management, paying what he assumed was my typical modest fee. In reality, Patterson Pastries was a subsidiary of a larger restaurant group that had engaged Brooks Digital Solutions for a comprehensive digital infrastructure overhaul worth $200,000. The project had been challenging enough to keep me working late into the evening, providing Derek with the perfect cover for his criminal planning session. "Just tired," I murmured, accepting the coffee with what I hoped appeared to be sleepy gratitude. "The Patterson project is more complex than I initially thought." Derek's expression shifted to that familiar mixture of pride and condescension that I now recognized as carefully calculated. "Don't push yourself too hard, honey. I know you want to contribute more, but these small business clients aren't worth sacrificing your health over. Maybe it's time to consider whether all this freelance stress is really worth the small returns." 6 months ago, those words would have filled me with appreciation for his protective concern. Now they revealed themselves as subtle psychological manipulation, designed to undermine my confidence while reinforcing his narrative of financial superiority. Derek was actively encouraging me to scale back my work precisely because he needed me to remain financially dependent and emotionally grateful. "You're probably right," I replied, playing the role of the uncertain wife seeking guidance from her more successful husband. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just spinning my wheels with these projects." The satisfaction that flickered across Derek's face was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. He leaned down to kiss my forehead, his lips warm against my skin, while his mind undoubtedly celebrated another successful manipulation. "That's my practical girl. No point in working yourself into exhaustion for pocket change when we're doing fine on my income." After Derek left for his day of corporate sabotage, I began the careful process of constructing my response strategy. The first step required contacting someone I could trust completely, someone whose discretion was absolute and whose professional capabilities could match the complexity of what I was planning. Claire Duncan had been my closest friend since our undergraduate days at Oregon State, and her current position as a senior partner at Duncan, Hayes and Associates made her the perfect ally for what would necessarily be a long-term, multifaceted campaign. Claire's downtown Portland office occupied an entire floor of a sleek glass building overlooking the Willamette River. Her assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, ushered me into the familiar space where Claire had built her reputation as one of the city's most formidable financial investigators. The walls displayed her degrees, professional certifications, and photographs from various industry conferences, but I was most interested in the discreet filing cabinets that I knew contained some of the most sensitive financial documentation in the Pacific Northwest. "Natalie," Claire greeted me with genuine warmth, though her experienced eye immediately detected that this wasn't a social visit. "You sounded unusually serious on the phone. What's going on?" I'd rehearsed this conversation during my drive downtown, but sitting across from Claire in her professional environment made the magnitude of Derek's deception feel even more real. "I need your help with something that's going to sound impossible at first, but I need you to trust me completely." For the next 2 hours I laid out everything I'd discovered about Derek's criminal activities, his systematic manipulation of our marriage, and the extensive network of fraud that apparently included several other men in our social circle. Claire listened with the focused attention of someone accustomed to parsing complex financial crimes, occasionally asking clarifying questions but never expressing disbelief or judgment. The offshore accounts Derek mentioned, Claire said when I'd finished my explanation, do you have any documentation or account numbers? Not yet, but I know he keeps financial records in his home office. The challenge is accessing them without arousing suspicion. I paused, considering the implications of what I was about to request. Claire, I need to ask you to do something that might compromise your professional ethics. I need you to help me gather evidence of criminal activity without Derek's knowledge or consent. Claire was quiet for several minutes, her fingers steepled as she considered the legal and ethical complexities of my request. Finally, she spoke with the measured tone of someone who'd reached a difficult but clear decision. Natalie, what you're describing isn't just marital deception. It's organized fraud on a scale that affects multiple victims beyond just the wives being manipulated. If Derek and his associates are rigging contracts and stealing from companies like Brennan Industries, they're stealing from employees, shareholders, and customers who have no idea they're being victimized. She stood and walked to her window, looking out over the city where Derek and his conspirators were presumably conducting their legitimate business activities while planning their next criminal ventures. I can't directly participate in breaking into Derek's office or stealing his records, but I can provide you with resources and guidance that would help you document evidence legally if you happen to discover it through other means. Claire returned to her desk and began pulling files from her cabinet, each containing information that would prove invaluable in the coming months. David Kim is a private investigator who specializes in financial crimes. He's expensive, but he's also completely discreet and extremely thorough. If Derek is involved in the kind of conspiracy you've described, David will be able to trace the money trails and identify all the participants. The second file contained contact information for Patricia Hernandez, a divorce attorney whose reputation for aggressive asset protection made her the perfect choice for someone anticipating a high-stakes marital dissolution. Patricia has handled cases involving hidden assets and financial fraud. She'll know how to structure your divorce filing to maximize asset recovery while minimizing Derek's ability to hide or transfer money before the legal process is complete. The third file was perhaps the most crucial. Marcus Webb worked as a forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud investigations, often serving as an expert witness in cases involving complex financial crimes. Marcus can analyze Derek's business activities and provide documentation that would be admissible in both divorce proceedings and criminal prosecutions. If you're going to bring down an entire conspiracy, you'll need someone who can follow money trails across multiple companies and jurisdictions. Claire's final recommendation surprised me. Lauren Foster, Marcus Thompson's wife, came to see me 3 months ago. She had concerns about irregularities in their family finances that she couldn't quite articulate, but her instincts were telling her something was wrong. I couldn't provide specific advice without more concrete information, but I gave her some general guidance about protecting her individual credit and maintaining separate financial records. The revelation that Lauren had already sensed something amiss in her marriage confirmed my suspicion that Derek's conspiracy involved multiple victims who were beginning to recognize patterns of deception. Do you think Lauren would be willing to cooperate if we can provide her with evidence of Marcus's involvement? I think Lauren is a lot stronger and smarter than Marcus gives her credit for. Claire replied with a slight smile. Nurses develop excellent instincts for detecting when someone isn't telling them the truth. If you can show her proof of what Marcus has been doing, I suspect she'll be a powerful ally. Leaving Claire's office with a clear action plan felt like emerging from underwater after holding my breath for months. The weight of Derek's deception hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed from a crushing burden into focused determination. I had professional allies, a strategic framework, and most importantly, the financial resources to fund a comprehensive investigation without Derek's knowledge. My first stop was David Kim's office in the Pearl District, a modest space that deliberately avoided the flashy presentation common among private investigators who catered to divorce cases and corporate espionage. David himself was equally understated, a quiet man in his 50s whose unremarkable appearance probably made him nearly invisible during surveillance operations. Claire Duncan explained the general nature of your situation, David said after we'd settled in his office. Before we discuss specifics, I need you to understand that what you're contemplating is a long-term investigation that could take months to complete thoroughly. If your husband is as careful as you've described, gathering actionable evidence will require patience and precision. David's methodology was reassuring in its thoroughness. He would begin with comprehensive background checks on Derek, Ryan Walsh, and the other men I'd identified as potential conspirators, tracing their financial histories, business associations, and communication patterns. Modern technology made it possible to monitor email communications, track financial transactions, and document meetings without physical surveillance, but the legal admissibility of such evidence required careful attention to privacy laws and constitutional protections. The offshore accounts your husband mentioned are particularly important, David explained, pulling out a legal pad to begin taking notes. Money laundering through international banking requires sophisticated knowledge and professional assistance. If Derek is moving hundreds of thousands of dollars outside the United States, he's either working with financial professionals who specialize in such transactions, or he's making mistakes that will leave clear evidence trails. David's fee structure reflected the complexity of financial crime investigation, but the costs were easily manageable given Brooks Digital Solutions' healthy cash flow. More importantly, David operated with the understanding that his clients often needed complete discretion about their own financial capabilities, so my ability to pay his substantial retainer without difficulty didn't prompt uncomfortable questions about my declared income level. I'll need access to your home computer systems, phone records, and any shared financial accounts, David continued. The goal is to document your husband's activities without alerting him to the investigation, which means we need to be extremely careful about how we gather information. The technical aspects of monitoring Derek's communications required installing discrete software on our shared home computers and establishing secure protocols for documenting his activities. David's expertise extended to understanding how criminal conspiracies typically operate, which meant he could anticipate the kinds of evidence we'd need to build a comprehensive case against not just Derek, but his entire network of associates. Financial fraud of this magnitude typically involves multiple participants with specialized roles. David explained, your husband and his friends probably aren't operating independently. There's likely someone with accounting expertise managing the money movements, someone with legal knowledge handling the contract manipulations, and someone with technology skills maintaining secure communications. That afternoon, I drove to Patricia Hernandez's law office with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Filing for divorce would be the ultimate acknowledgement that my marriage was beyond salvaging, but it was also the necessary first step in protecting myself legally and financially from Derek's criminal activities. Patricia's reputation for aggressive divorce litigation had been built through high-profile cases involving business executives and professional athletes, clients who required both discretion and ruthless effectiveness. Patricia's initial consultation focused primarily on understanding the scope of Derek's deception and the potential legal implications of his criminal activities. Oregon's divorce laws would allow me to claim a portion of any assets acquired during our marriage, but Derek's offshore accounts and fraudulent income created complex questions about asset division and potential criminal liability. If your husband has been hiding income and assets throughout your marriage, you have strong grounds for claiming a larger share of the marital estate, Patricia explained. However, if those assets were obtained through criminal activities, the courts might order them forfeited regardless of our divorce settlement. The possibility that Derek's criminal assets might be seized by law enforcement was actually advantageous from my perspective, since it would prevent him from using stolen money to fund his legal defense or hide additional resources during divorce proceedings. Patricia's strategy involved timing the divorce filing to coincide with criminal investigations, maximizing the pressure on Derek while minimizing his ability to respond effectively. The key is documentation, Patricia emphasized. Every piece of evidence you can gather about hidden assets, fraudulent income, or criminal activities strengthens our position and weakens his ability to claim legitimate ownership of disputed property. Patricia's fee structure was substantial but straightforward, and like David Kim, she operated with the understanding that some clients required complete discretion about their financial resources. My ability to pay her retainer immediately, and in full established the serious nature of my commitment to pursuing divorce proceedings aggressively and comprehensively. The final meeting of that transformative day was with Marcus Webb, the forensic accountant, who would analyze Derek's financial activities and provide expert testimony about the scope and mechanics of his fraud. Marcus's office was located in a professional building near the courthouse, reflecting his frequent role as an expert witness in complex financial litigation. Marcus's expertise encompassed both corporate fraud investigation and divorce asset analysis, making him uniquely qualified to understand how Derek's criminal activities affected our marital finances. His preliminary analysis suggested that Derek's offshore accounts and fraudulent income streams represented assets that should legally be considered marital property, despite their criminal origins. The challenge in cases like this, Marcus explained, is distinguishing between assets that your husband owned before marriage, assets that were legitimately acquired during marriage, and assets that were obtained through criminal activities during marriage. Oregon law treats each category differently in divorce proceedings. Marcus's investigation would focus on tracing Derek's financial activities throughout our entire marriage, identifying patterns of income and expenditure that didn't align with his declared employment, and documenting evidence of systematic fraud that could support both divorce proceedings and criminal prosecutions. If your husband has been engaged in organized fraud for years, there will be evidence in his financial records, communication patterns, and business associations. Corporate fraud leaves paper trails that can't be eliminated completely, especially when multiple people are involved in the conspiracy. By evening, I had assembled a professional team capable of investigating, documenting, and prosecuting Derek's crimes while protecting my own interests in the inevitable divorce proceedings. The irony of using legitimate financial resources to investigate illegitimate financial activities wasn't lost on me, but it felt like appropriate justice for someone who'd spent years manipulating my emotions and exploiting my trust. That night, as Derek returned home from another day of what I now knew was criminal conspiracy, I greeted him with the same warm smile I'd always shown, asking about his day and listening to his fabricated stories about demanding clients and challenging projects. The difference was that every lie he told was now being mentally cataloged as evidence, every manipulation was being recognized and documented, and every expression of false affection was being understood for what it truly was. Derek had no idea that his supposedly naive and financially dependent wife had spent the day assembling the professional expertise necessary to dismantle his life systematically and completely. His arrogance and contempt had blinded him to the possibility that his greatest victim might also be his most dangerous adversary. The stage was set for a comprehensive investigation that would expose not just Derek's individual crimes, but the entire network of fraud and manipulation that had victimized multiple families, while enriching a group of men who viewed their wives as obstacles to be managed rather than partners to be respected. Tomorrow would begin the careful process of gathering evidence, but tonight I allowed myself to feel the cold satisfaction of someone who'd transformed from victim to strategist in the span of a single day. Derek Martinez had seriously underestimated the woman lying beside him, and that miscalculation was about to cost him everything he'd stolen and everything he'd built on lies. 3 months of meticulous investigation had built an unshakable foundation of evidence, and the moment had finally arrived to confront Derek with the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd chosen the Bridgewater Country Club for this revelation, the same elegant venue where we'd celebrated our wedding 6 years ago. Tonight, however, Derek believed he was attending what I'd described as a casual dinner with some old friends, completely unaware that those friends included David Kim, Patricia Hernandez, and Marcus Webb, each carrying documentation that would obliterate his carefully constructed world of lies. Derek straightened his tie as we walked through the club's marble-floored entrance, his mood buoyant from what he'd mentioned was a particularly successful day closing a new contract. I knew from David's surveillance that the contract in question was another fraudulent arrangement with Morrison Tech, designed to funnel money away from legitimate competitors and into Derek's network of shell companies. His satisfaction with today's criminal success would make tonight's revelation even more devastating. "This is nice, honey," Derek said, surveying the club's opulent dining room with approval. "What's the occasion? You seemed mysterious about tonight when you made the reservation." "Just thought it would be good to reconnect with some people we haven't seen in a while," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I think you'll find the evening quite enlightening." The private dining room I'd reserved overlooked the river, its floor-to-ceiling windows providing a stunning view of the Portland skyline as evening light faded into dusk. Derek settled into his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed himself completely in control of his circumstances, reaching for the wine menu while making casual conversation about his day. "Mr. Martinez," Patricia Hernandez said, entering the room with the kind of authoritative presence that immediately commanded attention. "I'm Patricia Hernandez, and I represent your wife in several legal matters we need to discuss this evening." Derek's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips, confusion replacing his earlier contentment as he looked between Patricia's professional demeanor and my calm expression. "Natalie, what's going on here? Who is this woman?" "Derek," I said, my voice carrying a steel that he'd never heard before, "I'd like you to meet my attorney. She's here tonight because we've discovered some interesting discrepancies in our family finances that require immediate attention." David Kim entered next, carrying a leather portfolio that I knew contained months of surveillance evidence, financial analysis, and communication intercepts. Derek's face had progressed from confusion to alarm, as he began to understand that this wasn't the social evening he'd anticipated. Mr. Martinez, David said, settling into the chair across from Derek with professional calm. I'm a private investigator who's been examining your business activities for the past several months. What we've discovered raises serious questions about the source of your income and the nature of your professional relationships. The color drained from Derek's face as Marcus Webb joined our table, his forensic accounting expertise having traced every fraudulent transaction and hidden asset that Derek had accumulated during our marriage. The three professionals arranged their materials with methodical precision while Derek sat frozen, finally understanding that his secret life was no longer secret. This is insane, Derek managed, his voice cracking slightly. Natalie, whatever these people have told you, whatever they think they've found, I can explain everything. Actually, I replied, pulling out my own folder of documentation, I think I'll be doing the explaining tonight. Starting with the phone conversation you had with Ryan Walsh 3 months ago, the one where you discussed your offshore accounts, your fraud schemes, and your opinion of your supposedly unemployable wife. Derek's eyes widened as I began playing the audio recording that David's surveillance equipment had captured, his own voice filling the elegant dining room with casual admissions of criminal conspiracy and marital manipulation. The recording played for nearly 10 minutes, each revelation more damning than the last, while Derek sat motionless, watching his carefully constructed life crumble in real time. The Brennan Industries contract, Marcus interjected when the recording ended, spreading financial documents across the table. We've traced the money trail from their payment to Morrison Tech, through your shell company, and into the offshore accounts you mentioned. $340,000 in fraudulent kickbacks, which interestingly matches almost exactly with several large deposits you made into what you believed were secret investment accounts. Derek's attempt to maintain his composure was visibly failing, as the scope of our investigation became clear. You can't have access to my private accounts. That's illegal. Whatever evidence you think you have won't hold up in court. Patricia smiled with the confidence of someone who'd anticipated every possible defense. Actually, Derek, your wife has every legal right to information about assets acquired during your marriage. The fact that you obtained those assets through criminal activities doesn't create privacy protections, it creates criminal liability. Furthermore, David added, opening his portfolio to reveal surveillance photographs, your conspiracy extends far beyond simple financial fraud. We've documented meetings with Ryan Walsh, Marcus Thompson, and 4 other men involved in bid rigging, contract manipulation, and money laundering across multiple companies throughout the Pacific Northwest. The photographs showed Derek at various locations throughout the city, meeting with his co-conspirators in coffee shops, bars, and parking garages, each image time-stamped and geo-referenced with the precision of professional surveillance. David had captured not just the meetings themselves, but also documentation of the fraudulent contracts they discussed, the bribes they arranged, and the legitimate businesses they'd systematically cheated. Lauren Foster sends her regards, I mentioned casually, watching Derek's face register shock as he realized that Marcus Thompson's wife had joined our investigation. She was quite helpful once we showed her evidence of Marcus's criminal activities. Apparently, she'd suspected something was wrong for months but couldn't quite piece together what her husband was hiding. Derek's hands were visibly shaking now as he absorbed the implications of multiple wives discovering their husbands' crimes simultaneously. The network of mutual protection that had insulated his conspiracy was collapsing as each member's spouse chose justice over complicity. Jennifer Walsh was similarly cooperative, Patricia added, referencing Ryan's wife with satisfaction. She's already filed for divorce and turned over Ryan's home computer to federal investigators. It seems your friend kept detailed records of your various schemes, including some activities that even you might not be aware of. The revelation that Ryan had been maintaining comprehensive documentation of their criminal conspiracy sent Derek into visible panic. His face had progressed from pale to gray, as he realized that his most trusted accomplice had created evidence trails that could implicate all of them in years of systematic fraud. This is all circumstantial, Derek said desperately, grasping for any possible defense. You can't prove intent, and you certainly can't prove that I knew about any illegal activities. I trusted my business partners to handle contracts appropriately. Marcus Webb opened his laptop and turned the screen toward Derek, displaying a complex financial analysis that traced money flows through multiple companies and jurisdictions with forensic precision. Actually, Derek, intent is quite easy to prove when someone maintains detailed spreadsheets tracking fraudulent payments, schedules meetings specifically to discuss illegal activities, and celebrates criminal successes in recorded phone conversations. The spreadsheets displayed on Marcus's screen were devastating in their detail, showing not just the amounts of money Derek had stolen, but also his meticulous planning of future fraudulent schemes, his calculation of risk factors, and his coordination with other conspirators to maximize their collective criminal profits. The Morrison Tech relationship alone, Marcus continued, scrolling through months of documented transactions, shows clear intent to defraud multiple companies of legitimate bidding opportunities. You didn't just accept kickbacks, you actively solicited them, structured the payment methods, and recommended targets for future exploitation. Derek's breathing had become shallow and rapid as the full scope of our evidence became undeniable. Every defense he'd mentally prepared was being systematically dismantled by professionals who'd spent months building an airtight case against him and his associates. Natalie, Derek pleaded, turning to me with the desperate hope that marital affection might somehow overcome criminal evidence, we can work this out. Whatever problems we've had, whatever mistakes I've made, we can fix this together. You don't have to destroy our marriage over business disputes. The audacity of framing systematic fraud and emotional manipulation as mere business disputes revealed the depth of Derek's disconnection from reality. He still believed that his charm and my supposed emotional dependence could overcome documented evidence of years of criminal behavior. Derek, I replied, my voice carrying a coldness that finally penetrated his denial, our marriage was destroyed the moment you decided to build it on lies, theft, and manipulation. What's happening tonight isn't about destroying anything, it's about revealing what was always true. Patricia spread the divorce papers across the table with professional efficiency, each document representing a different aspect of Derek's financial ruin. These papers detail the dissolution of your marriage, the seizure of all assets obtained through criminal activities, and your wife's legal separation from any liability related to your fraudulent business dealings. The divorce settlement was devastating in its comprehensiveness, claiming not just half of Derek's legitimate assets, but also demanding return of all money he'd stolen during our marriage, plus interest and penalties. The prenuptial agreement he'd insisted upon, designed to protect his assets from a gold-digging wife, now worked in reverse, protecting my legitimate wealth from his criminal liabilities. The offshore accounts are already frozen, David informed Derek with satisfaction, thanks to cooperation between federal investigators and international banking authorities. The $340,000 you thought was safely hidden is now evidence in a criminal prosecution that will likely result in significant prison time. Derek's world was collapsing with the methodical precision of a controlled demolition, each revelation removing another support beam from the structure of lies he'd built over years of criminal activity. His face reflected the dawning understanding that this wasn't a negotiation or a confrontation, it was a sentencing hearing. The other wives wanted to be here tonight, I mentioned, allowing myself a small smile as Derek contemplated the extent of his social destruction, but they're busy with their own divorce proceedings. Lauren Foster particularly wanted me to thank you for inspiring her to hire a forensic accountant. She discovered that Marcus had been stealing even more money than we initially suspected. The image of multiple marriages simultaneously dissolving as the criminal conspiracy unraveled sent Derek into a state of visible shock. His network of mutual support and shared secrecy was being replaced by a network of wives working together to expose their husbands' crimes and protect each other's interests. Ryan Walsh was arrested this morning, Patricia added, consulting her phone for updates from other aspects of the investigation. Federal agents executed search warrants at his home and office simultaneously. Apparently, his computer records contained evidence of fraud schemes involving dozens of companies across multiple states. Derek's remaining composure finally cracked as he realized that his arrest was imminent and inevitable. The conspiracy that had enriched him for years was now generating evidence that would imprison him for years, and every relationship he'd counted on for protection had been severed by wives who chose justice over loyalty. The Brennan Industries executives will be interested to learn about your role in their contract manipulation, Marcus noted, reviewing his analysis of Derek's criminal activities. They're considering both criminal charges and civil litigation to recover their losses. Preliminary estimates suggest they were overcharged by nearly $2 million due to your fraudulent bid rigging. The scope of Derek's potential criminal liability was expanding beyond simple theft into racketeering, conspiracy and fraud charges that could result in decades of imprisonment. His arrogance and greed had transformed what might have been a single criminal incident into a pattern of behavior that federal prosecutors would pursue aggressively. "There's one more thing, Derek," I said, pulling out the final document from my folder with deliberate ceremony. "I think you should know that your supposedly unemployable wife has been quite successful during our marriage. Brooks Digital Solutions has generated over $2 million in revenue during the past 4 years, and my personal net worth significantly exceeds anything you've managed to steal." Derek's face went completely white as he processed the magnitude of his miscalculation. The woman he'd manipulated and condescended to for years had not only discovered his crimes but possessed the resources to prosecute them comprehensively. His greatest victim had become his most powerful adversary, and his contempt for her capabilities had blinded him to the danger she represented. "The irony is perfect," I continued, savoring the moment of complete revelation. "While you were stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars through criminal conspiracy, I was legitimately earning millions through the business acumen you constantly mocked. Your fraud made you a criminal. My success made me capable of ensuring you face appropriate consequences." As federal agents entered the dining room to execute Derek's arrest warrant, he sat motionless, finally understanding that his wife's apparent weakness had been carefully calculated strength, and that his own arrogance had provided her with everything she needed to destroy him completely. The man who'd spent years manipulating others had been outmaneuvered by someone he'd never respected enough to fear. The elegant dining room where Derek had expected a pleasant evening with friends had become the setting for his complete downfall, witnessed by professionals who'd documented every aspect of his crimes and prepared for every aspect of his destruction. His marriage was over, his assets were frozen, his conspirators were arrested, and his future held nothing but legal proceedings that would strip away everything he'd stolen and everything he'd built on lies. The weeks following Derek's arrest unfolded like dominoes falling in a carefully orchestrated sequence, each day bringing fresh revelations about the depth of his criminal network and new consequences for everyone involved in the conspiracy. From my penthouse office overlooking downtown Portland, I watched the systematic dismantling of what Derek had believed was an untouchable empire of fraud and manipulation. The morning after Derek's arrest, local news outlets picked up the story of a federal investigation into corporate bid rigging that had netted millions in fraudulent contracts. Derek Martinez, Ryan Walsh, and Marcus Thompson were identified as key figures in what prosecutors were calling one of the most extensive corporate fraud schemes in Oregon's recent history. The irony wasn't lost on me that Derek's name was now permanently linked to criminal activity in every search engine, ensuring that his professional reputation would never recover even if he somehow avoided prison. Derek's employer, Pacific Northwest Marketing Solutions, moved swiftly to distance themselves from the scandal. Within 48 hours of his arrest, they issued a press release announcing his immediate termination and their full cooperation with federal investigators. The company's CEO held a hastily arranged press conference expressing shock at Derek's alleged activities and emphasizing that they had been completely unaware of any criminal behavior. Their legal team was already working to minimize potential liability from contracts Derek had influenced during his employment. Ryan Walsh's insurance company reacted even more dramatically, not only firing him but also launching an internal audit to identify any fraudulent claims or manipulated policies he might have processed. The ripple effects extended to Morrison Tech, the company that had benefited from many of the rigged contracts, as federal investigators seized their financial records and began interviewing employees about their relationship with Derek's network. The human cost of Derek's criminal empire became evident as more victims came forward. Brennan Industries announced they were pursuing both criminal charges and civil litigation against all members of the conspiracy, seeking to recover the nearly $2 million they'd been overcharged through fraudulent bidding processes. Their CEO gave a passionate interview about how the scheme had forced them to lay off employees and delay expansion plans, putting human faces on the abstract financial crimes Derek had treated as victimless. Small businesses that had lost legitimate contract opportunities began sharing their stories with federal prosecutors, describing how Derek's bid rigging had cost them crucial growth opportunities and forced some to close entirely. A family-owned construction company in Beaverton had gone bankrupt after losing 3 consecutive contracts to Morrison Tech, never suspecting that the bidding process had been corrupted from the beginning. The owner's tearful testimony about losing his family business would later become a centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Derek's attempts to maintain his innocence crumbled as prosecutors presented evidence from his own communications and financial records. His court-appointed attorney, clearly overwhelmed by the volume of evidence against his client, began negotiating for a plea agreement that might reduce Derek's sentence in exchange for full cooperation with ongoing investigations. The offshore accounts that Derek had believed were safely hidden became the foundation for money laundering charges that could add decades to his potential prison sentence. Ryan Walsh proved to be the weakest link in the conspiracy, agreeing to testify against Derek and Marcus Thompson in exchange for a reduced sentence. His detailed confession revealed criminal activities that extended far beyond what our investigation had initially discovered, including insurance fraud, tax evasion, and kickback schemes involving municipal contracts in 3 different cities. Ryan's betrayal of his longtime friends demonstrated how quickly criminal loyalty evaporated when faced with serious prison time. Marcus Thompson's situation was particularly devastating because his nursing salary had made him financially dependent on his fraudulent income to maintain their lifestyle. When Lauren froze their joint accounts and filed for divorce, Marcus found himself unable to afford competent legal representation while facing charges that could result in 20 years in federal prison. His desperate attempts to contact Lauren through intermediaries only reinforced her determination to cooperate fully with prosecutors seeking to recover stolen funds. The social consequences proved as destructive as the legal ramifications. Derek's arrest became the subject of intense gossip throughout Riverside Heights, our formerly prestigious neighborhood where criminal charges carried the weight of complete social exile. Neighbors who had once sought Derek's advice about investments and business opportunities now crossed the street to avoid any association with his scandal. The Bridgewater Country Club, where Derek had networked with other professionals and where we'd celebrated our wedding, revoked his membership and banned him from the premises permanently. The club's board issued a statement expressing their commitment to maintaining the highest ethical standards among their membership, effectively declaring Derek persona non grata among Portland's business community. Derek's mother, who had always been proud of her successful son's ability to support his unemployed wife, found herself fielding calls from reporters seeking comment about her son's criminal activities. Her social circle at the senior center where she volunteered became a source of humiliation rather than pride, as other members whispered about her son's fraud charges and questioned whether she had benefited from his stolen money. The psychological impact on Derek became evident during his court appearances, where he appeared increasingly disheveled and defeated. The confident, manipulative man who had mocked my supposed financial inadequacy was replaced by someone who seemed to shrink a little more each time he faced the mounting evidence of his crimes. His attempts to maintain eye contact with me during divorce proceedings failed completely, as if he finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. Derek's legal team struggled with a defense strategy when faced with recordings of their client explicitly discussing criminal activities, financial records showing clear money laundering patterns, and testimony from co-conspirators eager to reduce their own sentences. Their attempts to portray Derek as a minor participant in a larger conspiracy collapsed when prosecutors demonstrated his central role in recruiting participants, structuring fraudulent transactions, and expanding the network's criminal activities. The civil consequences proved as devastating as the criminal charges. Brennan Industries filed a lawsuit seeking treble damages under federal racketeering statutes, potentially making Derek liable for over $6 million in restitution payments. Similar lawsuits from other victimized companies created a cascade of financial liability that would follow Derek long after his criminal sentence was completed. Derek's personal assets, including his share of our house, his car, and his investment accounts, were seized by federal marshals to ensure they remained available for restitution payments to fraud victims. The lifestyle he had maintained through stolen money evaporated overnight, leaving him dependent on his mother's charity for basic necessities while awaiting trial. The impact on our social network extended beyond the immediate conspirators to include their wives, who found themselves objects of both sympathy and suspicion. Some neighbors and friends rallied around Lauren Foster and Jennifer Walsh, recognizing them as victims of their husband's deception, while others questioned whether the wives could truly have been unaware of such extensive criminal activities. Lauren Foster's transformation was particularly striking. The quiet, self-effacing nurse who had always deferred to Marcus's financial decisions emerged as a fierce advocate for fraud victims and a compelling witness against her husband's criminal activities. Her testimony about Marcus's manipulation and deception helped prosecutors demonstrate the personal cost of white-collar crime beyond mere financial losses. Jennifer Walsh chose a different path, relocating to Seattle with her children to escape the scandal's social consequences. Her cooperation with investigators was complete and devastating, providing access to Ryan's computer records and personal communications that revealed the conspiracy's full scope. Her willingness to testify against her husband of 12 years demonstrated how thoroughly his betrayal had destroyed any remaining loyalty or affection. The media attention surrounding the case intensified as reporters discovered the human interest angle of wives who had uncovered their husbands' criminal activities and chosen justice over marital loyalty. Local television stations featured sympathetic profiles of Lauren and Jennifer, portraying them as heroes who had risked personal consequences to expose corporate fraud that had victimized numerous innocent businesses and individuals. My own role in the investigation became a subject of considerable media interest, though I maintained strict privacy about the details of how I had discovered Derek's crimes and assembled the evidence against him. Reporters were fascinated by the narrative of an underestimated wife who had turned the tables on a manipulative husband, but I declined all interview requests and allowed my attorney to handle media inquiries with carefully crafted statements about seeking justice for fraud victims. The federal prosecutor assigned to Derek's case, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Morrison, proved relentless in pursuing maximum penalties for all conspiracy members. Her opening statement at Derek's trial painted a vivid picture of systematic greed that had destroyed businesses, eliminated jobs, and enriched criminals at the expense of honest competition. She described Derek as a central figure who had corrupted legitimate business processes for personal gain, while maintaining a facade of respectability that had fooled even his own wife. Derek's sentencing hearing provided victims with an opportunity to address the court about how his crimes had affected their lives. The owner of the bankrupt construction company spoke about losing his family's livelihood, while employees of victimized businesses described how fraudulent contracts had cost them jobs and benefits. Each testimony reinforced the prosecution's argument that Derek's crimes had real consequences for real people, not just abstract financial institutions. The judge's final sentence reflected the severity of Derek's crimes and his central role in the conspiracy. 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, during which Derek would be required to make restitution payments to fraud victims. The financial penalties included forfeiture of all assets obtained through criminal activities, effectively ensuring that Derek would emerge from prison with nothing to show for years of fraud except a destroyed reputation and massive debt obligations. Ryan Walsh received a 10-year sentence in exchange for his cooperation, while Marcus Thompson was sentenced to 12 years after refusing to testify against his co-conspirators. The varying sentences reflected each man's level of cooperation with investigators and their relative roles in the criminal enterprise, but all three faced financial ruin that would extend far beyond their prison terms. The conspiracy's broader network continued to unravel as federal investigators followed money trails and communication patterns to identify additional participants. 2 executives at Morrison Tech were arrested for their role in processing fraudulent contracts, while a municipal official in Vancouver, Washington, faced charges for accepting bribes in exchange for steering city contracts to Derek's network. Derek's final court appearance, where he was formally sentenced and remanded to federal custody, marked the end of a man who had once believed himself untouchable. The confident manipulator who had mocked his wife's supposed financial inadequacy was led away in handcuffs, facing more than a decade in prison and financial obligations that would follow him for the rest of his life. As Derek's prison transport disappeared from view outside the federal courthouse, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, and victims had been vindicated, but the human cost of Derek's crimes extended far beyond his own punishment. Families had been destroyed, businesses had been ruined, and trust had been shattered in ways that would take years to rebuild. The systematic destruction of Derek's criminal empire was complete, but the consequences would continue rippling through our community for years to come. His arrogance and greed had created a web of destruction that touched dozens of innocent lives, and his punishment, however severe, could never fully restore what his crimes had taken away. 2 years had passed since Derek's conviction, and the transformation of my life felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. Standing in the executive conference room of Brooks Digital Solutions' new headquarters in the Pearl District, I surveyed the thriving company that no longer needed to operate in secrecy. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Portland's skyline, a daily reminder of how far I'd traveled from the woman who once lay awake listening to her husband's criminal confessions through bedroom walls. The company had expanded exponentially once I no longer needed to hide its success. We now employed 47 people across 3 offices, with clients ranging from innovative startups to established corporations seeking digital transformation. The revenue that Derek had dismissed as pocket change now exceeded $8 million annually, making Brooks Digital Solutions one of the fastest-growing technology consulting firms in the Pacific Northwest. My assistant knocked softly before entering with the morning's schedule. "The Portland Business Journal interview is at 10, she reminded me, followed by lunch with the Women in Technology Foundation board. "The governor's office confirmed your 3 o'clock appointment about the small business initiative." The public recognition felt surreal after years of deliberate invisibility. Portland Business Journal had featured Brooks Digital Solutions on their cover last month, highlighting our role in helping local businesses recover from economic challenges through strategic technology adoption. The accompanying article mentioned my previous marriage to Derek Martinez only briefly, focusing instead on how I'd built a successful company while supporting fraud victims through pro bono consulting services. The Women in Technology Foundation had invited me to join their board after learning about my mentorship programs for female entrepreneurs. We'd established scholarships for women pursuing technology careers and created networking opportunities that helped combat the isolation many female business owners experienced. The work felt meaningful in ways that transcended simple business success, creating positive change from the ashes of Derek's destructive legacy. Lauren Foster had become one of my closest allies in this mission. Her nursing background provided insights into healthcare technology needs that had opened entirely new markets for our consulting services. More importantly, her resilience and grace in rebuilding her life after Marcus's betrayal served as inspiration for other women facing similar challenges. "How are the kids adjusting to the new house?" I asked Lauren during our weekly coffee meeting at a cafe in the Alberta Arts District. She'd finally purchased a home in her own name, a modest but charming craftsman that represented complete independence from her criminal ex-husband's tainted assets. "They love having their own rooms," Lauren replied with the contentment of someone who'd discovered that happiness didn't require wealth or status. "Emma's thriving in her new school, and Jake joined the robotics club. It's amazing how much lighter everything feels when you're not constantly worried about hidden secrets or financial instability." Lauren's transformation had been remarkable to witness. The quiet, anxious woman who'd once apologized for Marcus's every mood swing had become a confident nurse practitioner running her own clinic. Her testimony during Marcus's trial had been devastating in its precision, documenting years of manipulation and gaslighting with the clinical objectivity of someone who'd finally recognized emotional abuse for what it was. "Any word from Marcus lately?" I asked, though I suspected the answer from Lauren's expression. "He writes letters from prison sometimes," she said with a slight shrug. "Still trying to convince me that everything was my fault somehow. His mother thinks I should visit him, but I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require subjecting yourself to continued manipulation." Marcus Thompson was serving his 12-year sentence at a federal facility in California, his nursing license permanently revoked and his prospects for post-release employment virtually non-existent. The restitution payments required by his sentence would consume any income he might earn for decades, ensuring that his victims' interests remained paramount over his personal comfort. Jennifer Walsh had chosen complete reinvention after Ryan's conviction. She'd moved to Seattle with her children and started a victim advocacy organization that helped other families navigate the complex aftermath of white-collar crime. Her work had gained national attention, leading to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that provided both financial stability and meaningful purpose. Jennifer's keynote at the Fraud Prevention Conference was incredible, Lauren mentioned, scrolling through her phone to show me photos from the event. She had the entire audience in tears when she talked about explaining to her 8-year-old why Daddy couldn't come home anymore. The ripple effects of our investigation had extended far beyond Derek's immediate conspiracy. Federal prosecutors had used our evidence to launch similar investigations in 3 other states, uncovering networks of corporate fraud that victimized hundreds of businesses and thousands of employees. Our willingness to come forward had encouraged other wives to examine their husbands' business activities more critically, leading to additional prosecutions and recoveries. The governor's office had invited me to participate in a task force addressing corporate fraud prevention, recognizing that victims often possessed insights that law enforcement professionals might miss. My unique perspective as someone who'd successfully investigated and prosecuted sophisticated financial crimes while maintaining operational security had proven valuable in developing protocols for other potential victims. The new legislation should pass this session, I told the task force during our monthly meeting at the state capitol. Requiring disclosure of beneficial ownership in shell companies will make it much harder for criminals like Derek to hide stolen assets offshore. The legislation we'd proposed would close loopholes that Derek's network had exploited, requiring greater transparency in corporate structures and making it easier for investigators to trace fraudulent money flows. The bill had bipartisan support, driven by recognition that corporate fraud ultimately harmed everyone through increased costs, reduced competition, and erosion of public trust in business institutions. Derek himself had become a cautionary tale within the federal prison system, his case studied in white-collar crime prevention courses and cited in judicial opinions about appropriate sentences for corporate fraud. His attempts to appeal his conviction had failed comprehensively, with appellate courts noting the overwhelming evidence of his guilt and the appropriateness of his sentence given the scope of his crimes. His mother visited him monthly, one of the few people who maintained any contact with the man who'd once been the pride of Riverside Heights. Her social isolation had been complete, former friends avoiding association with the mother of a convicted felon, while neighbors whispered about whether she'd known about her son's criminal activities. The elegant woman who'd once boasted about Derek's success now volunteered at a food bank, seeking redemption through service to people her son's crimes had helped impoverish. The house on Maple Ridge Drive had been sold to satisfy restitution obligations, its proceeds distributed among fraud victims according to a complex formula developed by the federal court. The new owners, a young family with no knowledge of its history, had painted over the rooms where Derek had planned his crimes and transformed his home office into a cheerful nursery. My own living situation reflected the dramatic changes in my circumstances and priorities. The penthouse apartment I'd purchased in downtown Portland offered spectacular views and modern amenities, but more importantly, it represented a life built on honest success rather than hidden deception. The open floor plan and floor-to-ceiling windows created an atmosphere of transparency that felt like the antithesis of the secrets and lies that had characterized my marriage. The apartment's home office bore no resemblance to the hidden workspace where I'd once planned Derek's downfall. Instead, it served as a place of creativity and collaboration, where I worked with clients to solve legitimate business challenges and mentored young entrepreneurs building their own companies. The walls displayed awards from business organizations and photographs from charity events rather than surveillance equipment and evidence files. Dating had been an unexpected challenge in the aftermath of Derek's conviction. The media attention surrounding the case had made me recognizable in Portland's business community, and potential romantic partners often seemed more interested in the dramatic story of how I'd exposed my husband's crimes than in getting to know me as an individual. The few relationships I'd attempted had struggled with the weight of my past and the intensity of media interest in my personal life. "You need to give yourself time," Claire Duncan advised during one of our regular dinners at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. "What you've been through would challenge anyone's ability to trust again. Don't feel pressured to rush into anything before you're ready." Claire's friendship had deepened during the investigation and its aftermath, her professional expertise in financial crimes providing both practical support and emotional understanding. She'd become something of a celebrity herself within the forensic accounting community, speaking at conferences about the investigative techniques we'd used to uncover Derek's conspiracy. "The Patterson Industries case is finally resolved," Claire mentioned, referencing one of the companies that had been victimized by Derek's bid rigging. "They received full restitution plus damages and they're expanding their operations again. 40 new jobs, all because we helped them recover from what Derek's network stole." The human impact of our investigation remained its most meaningful aspect. Families had been reunited with stolen savings, small businesses had received compensation that enabled them to survive and grow, and employees had returned to jobs that Derek's crimes had eliminated. The abstract concept of justice had translated into concrete improvements in real people's lives. David Kim had parlayed his success in our case into a thriving private investigation practice specializing in corporate fraud. His methodical approach and technological expertise had made him the go-to investigator for attorneys handling complex financial crimes, while his discretion and professionalism had earned him a reputation for absolute trustworthiness. "The pharmaceutical case in Seattle should wrap up next month," David reported during our quarterly check-in meeting. "Your methodology for monitoring communications and financial transactions has become the industry standard for these investigations." Patricia Hernandez had been appointed to the State Bar's Ethics Committee, her aggressive advocacy for fraud victims having established her as a leading voice in family law reform. She'd successfully lobbied for legislation strengthening asset protection for spouses of criminal defendants, ensuring that innocent family members wouldn't lose their homes and savings due to their partner's crimes. Marcus Webb's forensic accounting expertise had led to consulting contracts with federal agencies investigating international money laundering schemes. His analysis of Derek's offshore banking had revealed patterns that investigators were now using to identify similar criminal enterprises operating across national borders. The professional relationships forged during our investigation had evolved into lasting friendships and ongoing collaborations. We'd formed an informal network of experts who consulted on complex fraud cases, sharing techniques and insights that had proven effective in uncovering sophisticated criminal schemes. The victims of Derek's crimes had organized their own support group, meeting monthly to share experiences and provide mutual assistance as they rebuilt their lives and businesses. The group had grown to include victims of similar fraud schemes from other investigations, creating a community of survivors who understood the unique challenges of recovering from sophisticated financial crimes. Brennan Industries had not only recovered fully from Derek's fraud but had expanded significantly, their CEO crediting our investigation with helping them identify vulnerabilities in their contracting processes that made them stronger and more competitive. They'd established an annual scholarship in my name for women pursuing business degrees, recognizing that prevention of future crimes required education and awareness. The small construction company that had gone bankrupt due to Derek's bid rigging had been refunded enough money to restart operations, their owner's emotional testimony during Derek's sentencing having moved the judge to prioritize their restitution claim. They'd since grown into one of Portland's most respected residential contractors, their commitment to ethical business practices serving as a model for industry reform. The ripple effects of accountability had transformed entire business communities, as companies implemented stronger oversight procedures and executives faced increased scrutiny of their financial activities. The casual corruption that Derek's network had exploited became much more difficult to sustain as awareness of white-collar crime consequences spread throughout professional circles. My public speaking engagements focused on empowering potential victims to recognize warning signs of financial manipulation and providing them with resources to investigate suspicious activities safely. The presentations drew overflow crowds of women who recognized themselves in my story of gradual awakening to systematic deception. The most important message I told a gathering of female entrepreneurs at Portland State University is that your instincts are usually correct. If something feels wrong about your partner's financial behavior, trust that feeling and investigate carefully. You have the right to understand your family's financial situation completely. The university had invited me to serve as an adjunct professor teaching a course on business ethics and fraud prevention, recognition that my real-world experience provided insights that traditional academic curricula often missed. The students' engagement with case studies based on Derek's crimes demonstrated how education could prevent future victims from falling prey to similar schemes. The Women in Technology Foundation had expanded its mission to include financial literacy programs specifically designed for women in male-dominated industries. Recognizing that professional success without financial awareness left even accomplished women vulnerable to manipulation by partners who controlled household finances. Spring brought news that Derek had been denied parole at his first eligibility hearing, the parole board citing his continued refusal to accept full responsibility for his crimes and his lack of meaningful restitution payments to victims. His prison work assignment in the laundry facility paid enough to cover basic commissary needs but left nothing for the millions of dollars in restitution he owed. Ryan Walsh had been more successful in demonstrating rehabilitation, his cooperation with ongoing investigations and his prison counseling work earning him consideration for early release after serving 7 years of his 10-year sentence. His ex-wife Jennifer had mixed feelings about his potential freedom, recognizing his efforts at redemption while remaining committed to protecting their children from his influence. The anniversary of Derek's arrest had become an unofficial holiday among the victims and their families, a day to celebrate justice achieved and lives rebuilt from the ruins of his criminal enterprise. This year's gathering at Lauren's house brought together dozens of people whose stories intersected through Derek's crimes but who'd found strength and purpose in their shared experience of survival and recovery. It's remarkable how much good has come from something so terrible, Lauren reflected as we stood on her back deck watching children play while their parents shared stories of recovery and resilience. Derek thought he was so clever manipulating all of us, but look what we've built from the pieces he tried to leave behind. The evening news that night featured a retrospective on Derek's case marking the second anniversary of his conviction with interviews from victims, prosecutors, and policy experts discussing the lasting impact of our investigation. The segment concluded with footage of the thriving businesses that had recovered from his crimes and the new legislation that had been inspired by our advocacy efforts. My reflection on the journey from victim to victor felt less dramatic than observers might expect. The transformation hadn't been a single moment of triumph, but rather a gradual process of reclaiming power, rebuilding trust, and redirecting energy from survival to growth. Derek's betrayal had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed and connections I couldn't have imagined. The woman who'd once lain awake listening to her husband's criminal confessions had become someone who spoke truth to power, who protected others from the predators she'd learned to recognize, and who built legitimate success from authentic effort rather than stolen wealth. Derek's greatest victim had indeed become his most effective adversary, but more importantly, she'd become someone capable of preventing others from suffering similar victimization. As evening settled over Portland's skyline, visible through the windows of my downtown office where I was finishing preparations for tomorrow's fraud prevention conference, I felt the quiet satisfaction of work well done and justice well served. Derek Martinez was exactly where he belonged, paying the price for years of cruelty and greed, while his former victims had transformed their pain into purpose and their recovery into resilience. The phone call that had ended my marriage had ultimately liberated me from a life built on lies, manipulation, and hidden shame. Derek's arrogance had blinded him to the strength of the woman he'd underestimated, and his contempt had provided her with everything she needed to ensure that justice prevailed and that his victims received the protection and restitution they deserved. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.